The New York Rifle and Pistol Association filed a lawsuit arguing that this violated the 14th Amendment.
But then the legislature stepped in to impose a number of new conditions, sparking a stampede from people.
Supreme Court ruling that determined New York's concealed carry gun laws were unconstitutional.
Whether the Constitution guarantees the right for New Yorkers to carry firearms in public.
A pistol permit holder in New York State, you might have to recertify online.
Carry permit. They must go through firearms training and an in-person interview, as well as a social media review.
Srouwer versus City of New York case. In Srouwer versus City of New York, a significant legal battle unfolded regarding the denial of an arms license based on the applicant's purported lack of good moral character. This case, presided over by Judge John P. Cronin of the Southern District of New York, delved into the intricacies of Second Amendment rights and the burden of proof placed on the state when restricting such rights. At the heart of the matter were two license denials, one for possessing a rifle or shotgun and another for a handgun. The rejections were grounded in the applicant, Srouwer's extensive record of moving violations and driver's license suspensions, tallying an astonishing 28 and 30 respectively.
A pistol permit holder in New York State, you might have to recertify online.
Carry permit. They must go through firearms training and an in-person interview, as well as a social media review.
This all centers around an NRA challenge to a century-old New York State law. Parameters under which someone can get a concealed carry permit and makes it a longer, more difficult process to acquire one.
These infractions were cited as reflections of a negative moral character, justifying the denials of his arm licenses. However, the legal landscape shifted with the landmark Bruin decision, prompting Srouwer to pivot his legal strategy. Instead of pursuing an as-applied challenge, he opted for a facial challenge, withdrawing the former and sparing the need for extensive discovery. This maneuver positioned the case on broader constitutional grounds, particularly invoking the Second Amendment's protection of individual conduct. Judge Cronin's ruling emphasized that a facial challenge to a law can prevail if it implicates fundamental rights protected by the Constitution, such as those enshrined in the Second Amendment. Notably, he highlighted that when the plain text of the Second Amendment covers an individual's conduct, there is a presumption of constitutional protection. The burden then shifts to the state to demonstrate that its restriction on arms ownership is consistent with America's historical tradition of arm regulation. Here, Judge Cronin noted a critical point in footnote 6, where he observed the defendants' misunderstanding of their burden of proof. He highlighted instances where the city attempted to reverse the burden, pointing out the lack of historical analysis and evidence provided by the plaintiff to support his assertions. In response to the city's argument that the plaintiff failed to provide historical analysis or legal precedent supporting his claims, Judge Cronin aptly reminded them that it was their obligation to demonstrate the consistency of the challenge regulations with the nation's history of arm regulation.
Conditions like having to turn over 3 years of social media posts to prove that they deserve a permit.
You are of good moral character, then you'd have to give up all of your current and past social media accounts.
Now, digging into this ruling a little bit more, New York had a gun control law that is more than a century old.
The Supreme Court struck down New York's requirement that legal gun owners demonstrate proper cause or a need.
The judge's wry remark, thanking them for stating the obvious, underscores the reversal of responsibility attempted by the defendants. This legal saga underscores the complex interplay between individual rights, governmental regulations, and the burden of proof in constitutional challenges. The Second Amendment's protection of the right to bear arms is not absolute, but it imposes a significant burden on the state to justify restrictions, particularly when they impinge on fundamental rights. In analyzing the constitutionality of arm regulations, courts must weigh the government's interest in public safety against the individual rights to self-defense and protection. This delicate balance requires a nuanced understanding of historical precedent, legislative intent, and societal norms surrounding arms ownership and regulation. The Srouwer case serves as a poignant reminder of the judiciary's role in safeguarding constitutional rights and holding the government accountable for its actions. Legal battle over arms. In the legal battle of Srour versus City of New York, the city attempted to argue that the Second Amendment only applies to individuals deemed responsible and law-abiding, thereby excluding those lacking good moral character. However, this argument faltered in the face of scrutiny as it failed to distinguish between the conduct of possessing an arm and the regulation thereof. The court astutely pointed out that such an interpretation would allow the government to circumvent the necessary analysis of the history and tradition of arm regulation as mandated by Bruin merely by labeling the regulation as pertaining to individual conduct. This manipulation of the Second Amendment, based on subjective labels, raised concerns about governmental overreach and the potential exclusion of individuals from their constitutional rights. The central question then became whether the good moral character requirement aligned with the nation's historical tradition of arm regulation. The ordinance in question outlined various factors for assessing moral character, including arrests, convictions, poor driving history, lack of candor with authorities, and other grounds for permit denial. This approach echoed the problematic May issue laws invalidated by Bruin. The court aptly highlighted the subjectivity inherent in the concepts of good moral character and good cause. Such subjective criteria left considerable discretion in the hands of officials, making it difficult if not impossible to reconcile with Bruin's requirement for historical precedent. Moreover, the lack of historical analogs for such laws raised doubts about their legitimacy. The city's reference to historical laws prohibiting dangerous or potentially dangerous persons from possessing arms did little to support its case. While such laws existed, they differed significantly from vesting discretionary power in municipal officials to deny arms possession based on moral character.
To apply for a pistol permit, you'll need to be at least 21 years old, complete 16 hours of training.
State lawmakers have made New York State's gun laws some of the strictest in the entire country.
The Supreme Court has just struck down a New York state law that restricted who could carry a concealed handgun.
And then turn over your social media accounts. Once you have a permit, you'll also have to recertify.
The court noted that many individuals considered lacking in moral character were not necessarily dangerous, a critical distinction that undermined the city's argument. Similarly, the city's invocation of usual suspect laws and surety laws failed to establish relevance to the current case. While loyalty oaths and surety requirements existed, they differed substantially in their scope and purpose from the ordinance at hand. Loyalty oaths, for instance, provided an objective criterion for assessment, unlike the subjective character determinations under the city's ordinance. Moreover, the comparison to surety laws highlighted a fundamental difference in approach. Surety laws pertain to the burden of public carry of arms and required a specific showing of reasonable fear of harm or breach of peace. In contrast, the city's ordinance denied the right to possess an arm based solely on subjective character assessments, lacking a comparable objective standards. The legal dispute underscored broader concerns about the balance between individual rights and governmental regulation. The Second Amendment's protection of the right to bear arms necessitates careful consideration of historical precedent and legislative intent. By scrutinizing the constitutionality of arm regulations, courts play a crucial role in upholding constitutional principles and safeguarding individual liberties. Challenging good moral character. The court's analysis revealed that the concept of good moral character is inherently subjective, leaving considerable discretion in the hands of officials and lacking historical analogs to justify its application in arms laws. The comparison to historical laws punishing affrayers who would go or ride armed offensively highlighted a fundamental difference in scope, as the ordinance in question applied to anyone seeking to possess an arm irrespective of their conduct. Judge Cronin's decision to issue a permanent injunction against the provision reflected a commitment to upholding constitutional rights and ensuring accountability in governmental actions. By declaring the good moral character criterion facially unconstitutional, the court affirmed the principle that fundamental rights cannot be abridged without proper justification and adherence to constitutional standards. The legal landscape surrounding good moral character requirements in arms laws extend beyond Schrower versus City of New York. In Antoniuk versus Hoku, Judge Glenn T. Sotheby similarly rejected the state's good moral character requirement, likening it to an improper special need for self-protection requirement. The ongoing legal battle underscores the broader implications of subjective criteria in arms laws and the need for clear, objective standards to protect constitutional rights. Furthermore, the concept of good moral character extends beyond arms laws and appears in other areas of the law, such as naturalization requirements and professional licensing.
The New York Rifle and Pistol Association filed a lawsuit arguing that this violated the 14th Amendment.
But then the legislature stepped in to impose a number of new conditions, sparking a stampede from people.
Supreme Court ruling that determined New York's concealed carry gun laws were unconstitutional.
Whether the Constitution guarantees the right for New Yorkers to carry firearms in public.
While objective criteria may be permissible in certain contexts, the subjectivity inherent in determining moral character raises concerns about due process and the protection of individual rights. In response to these concerns, states with shall-use laws have adopted specific criteria for arms licensing, avoiding open-ended discretion and arbitrary denials based on subjective assessments of moral character. Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence on Bruin highlighted the importance of objective criteria in arms licensing regimes, emphasizing the need for balanced public safety with the protection of individual rights. As the legal landscape continues to evolve, cases like Schrower versus City of New York and Antoniuk versus Hoku serve as critical milestones in defining the scope of constitutional rights and holding governmental actions accountable. By challenging subjective criteria and advocating for clear objective standards, these cases underscore the importance of judicial oversight in safeguarding fundamental liberties in a democratic society. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.